In the year 974 AD, a noblewoman in Kyoto locked herself in a room and refused to eat. She had been betrayed by her husband, by her family, by the gods she prayed to. 40 days later, when they opened the door, she was gone. What walked out of that room was not her. It had her face, but its hair had turned to iron, and its eyes burned red. This is not a myth. This story was recorded by a court historian. Her name was Lady Rokujō, and what she became had a name too, a name that has haunted Japan for over 1,000 years. Oni. You have probably seen them before, in anime, in video games, in paintings on the walls of temples. A massive figure, red or blue skin, 2 horns, a club made of iron, roaring, terrifying, standing at the gates of hell itself. But here is what most people miss. The Oni were not always monsters. They were people, ordinary people, men and women, who suffered so deeply, who were wronged so completely, that something inside them broke, and from that breaking, something else was born. Stay with me, because this story is not just about a Japanese demon. It is about what happens to a human soul when it has nowhere left to go. Let us start at the beginning. The word Oni-gwe is one of the oldest characters in the Japanese written language. Scholars trace it back to a Chinese root meaning hidden or concealed, something that moves in darkness, something you cannot see until it is standing right in front of you. In the earliest texts, the Kojiki, written in 712 AD, and the Nihon Shoki, written just 8 years later, Oni appear not as physical creatures, but as forces, invisible presences, the kind of dread you feel in an empty forest at noon, when the birds have stopped singing and the air goes still and you cannot explain why your body wants to run. They were not borrowed from China, though the character was. They were not imported from Buddhist theology, though Buddhism would later reshape them completely. The Oni were native to the Japanese understanding of the world, the belief that reality has a surface and a shadow, and that some things live only in the shadow. But then Buddhism arrived in Japan in the 6th century, and everything changed. Buddhist cosmology brought with it a vision of the afterlife, so detailed, so specific, so architecturally precise, that it staggers the mind. There were not 1 or 2 hells. There were 8 great hells, each with 16 smaller hells attached, a total of 136 distinct chambers of punishment, each designed for a specific category of sin, and the Oni were their guards. In these texts, particularly the Ojoshu, written by the monk Genshin in 905 AD, the Oni are described in clinical detail. Red ones carried iron clubs, blue ones carried ropes to bind the dead, black ones carried sacks to drag the newly arrived souls from the banks of the river Sanzu, the Japanese equivalent of the Styx, into the chambers below. They did not choose their victims randomly. They were assigned. They kept records, and they answered to one master, the great King Enma, Lord of the Underworld, who sat in judgment over every soul that passed through his gates. You might think, this is just religion, just mythology, just the ancient equivalent of a horror story told to keep people in line. But here is the part nobody tells you. The Japanese did not think of Enma's court as a metaphor. When the monk Genshin wrote his vision of hell, he was not writing allegory. He was writing a manual, a warning so specific that it named the sins, named the punishments, and described the physical sensation of each one in enough detail to make you put down the scroll. Those who lied had their tongues pulled out by iron pliers. Those who killed animals for food were submerged in pools of boiling blood. Those who broke their vows were pressed between mountains of iron. And the Oni administered every one of these punishments, not with hatred, not with pleasure, with the detached efficiency of a bureaucrat. Because in Japanese hell, the machinery of punishment is ordered. It is meticulous. It runs on a schedule. This is not the chaotic fire and screaming hell of medieval European Christianity. This is something more unsettling, an afterlife that operates like a government office, where your sins are weighed, categorized, filed, and addressed in the appropriate chamber by the appropriate demon with the appropriate tool. Now watch what happens next. Because Buddhism did something to the Oni that no other religious tradition had done before. It gave them a past. In a collection of Buddhist tales called the Nihon Ryoki, compiled around 822 AD, a monk records the story of a man who dies and is brought before Enma's court. The king reviews his file. The sins are read aloud, and then one of the Oni in the chamber steps forward and says, "I know this man. He was my neighbor. In life, I wronged him. I took his land. I lied about him to the magistrate, and my punishment for that crime is to serve here to be the one who now administers his punishment." The story does not tell us whether the man was punished or forgiven. It tells us something more important. The Oni was once human. This is the thread that runs through every great Oni story in Japanese literature. Not all Oni, not every demon in every tale, but the ones that endure, the ones that carry real weight, are always traced back to a person, a specific person, with a specific wound. In the Heian period, roughly 794 to 1185 AD, the aristocracy of Kyoto developed a concept they called mono-no-ke, literally, the spirit of things. The belief that intense emotion, grief, jealousy, resentment could detach from a living person and move through the world as an independent force, causing illness, causing death, haunting those who had caused the original pain. Lady Rokujō, the woman I told you about at the beginning of this video, is the most famous case. She did not die and become an Oni. She became something rarer and more frightening, a living Oni. Her mono-no-ke left her body while she slept and attacked the women her husband loved. She woke each morning with no memory, but the ash from funeral incense clung to her robes. The court exorcists identified the spirit, named it, tried to bind it, and could not. Because it was not a ghost. It was still attached to a living woman who had no idea what she was doing in her sleep. This is the horror the Heian aristocracy lived with, not the fear of Oni coming down from the mountains, but the fear that the person sitting next to you at court, the woman pouring your tea, the man you had wronged 6 years ago and thought had forgiven you, might be sending something into your room at night that you could not see and could not stop. But the Oni did not stay invisible. By the Muromachi period, roughly 1336 to 1573 AD, they had taken physical form in the popular imagination, and the most famous of them had names. Shuten-dōji. If you know one Oni, you know this one. He lived on Mount Ōe, northwest of Kyoto, and according to the chronicles of the period, he had been kidnapping noble women from the capital for years, taking them to his fortress in the mountains, where he and his followers feasted and drank sake, brewed from human blood. The emperor sent warriors, not once, multiple times. They did not come back. Finally, in what the records date to somewhere around 990 AD, the emperor commissioned the legendary warrior Minamoto no Raiko, the greatest swordsman of his age, to lead a team of 6 elite fighters into the mountains to end it. They disguised themselves as traveling monks. They were welcomed into Shuten-dōji's fortress. They drank with him. They laughed with him. And when he fell asleep, Raiko cut off his head. What happened next has been argued about by scholars for 1,000 years. The head severed, lying on the ground, kept speaking. It rose from the floor and bit down onto Raiko's helmet with such force that it took 4 men to pull it free. The story is told in a scroll painting called the Oeyama Ekotoba, one of the most important pieces of medieval Japanese art still in existence. And in that painting, Shuten-dōji is not drawn as a mindless beast. He is drawn as a beautiful young man, elegant, refined, wearing court robes. Because that, according to the oldest versions of the story, is what he was. A child abandoned by his parents, raised in a Buddhist temple, bullied, isolated, rejected until the grief curdled into something else, something that could not be contained by human skin. He did not choose to become a monster. He was made into one. Here is what I want you to sit with for a moment. Every major culture in the world has its version of the hell demon. The Christian tradition has Satan, a fallen angel, defined by pride, by the desire to be God. The Islamic tradition has Iblis, also a fall from divine grace, also pride. The Greek tradition has the Erinyes, the furies born from the blood of a wound that could not heal. But the Oni are different. They are not fallen angels. They were never divine. They are the overflow of human suffering, the place where grief goes when there is no more room for it inside a person. They are what happens when the world breaks someone and no one comes to help. The Buddhist texts are actually quite clear about this. Enma's records show not just what a soul did in life, they show what was done to that soul. The Oni who guard hell are not there because they were evil, they are there because they were not protected. This is why the Setsubun ritual, the annual bean throwing ceremony, still practiced across Japan today, where families shout, Oni wa soto, fuku wa uchi, demons out, fortune in, is not really an act of conquest. It is an act of boundary setting. You are not destroying the Oni. You are telling them, not here, not this house, not tonight, because everyone knows they will be somewhere else tonight. There is one more story I need to tell you. It is the one that stayed with me longest. It comes from the Konjaku Monogatari Shu, a collection of tales compiled in the early 12th century, and it is about a woman who lived alone on the edge of a village in the mountains of northern Japan. Her husband had died. Her children had been taken by illness one by one until none were left. Her neighbors, afraid of the grief that seemed to follow her like weather, stopped visiting. She had no one. One winter, the records do not give us a year. She stopped speaking. She stopped eating. She sat by the door of her house and looked at the mountain. In the spring, the villagers found the house empty. The door was gone. Not broken. Gone. As if something had walked through the wall. They found footprints in the mud outside, too large to be hers, too deep to have been made by anything light. They did not search the mountain. They already knew what they would find. The Oni never fully left Japan. In the modern era, they became cartoon characters, goofy, lovable, red-faced figures in commercials and children's books, a way of softening something the culture still did not know how to talk about directly. But every year at Setsubun, when families throw beans at the door, there is still a moment, just a moment, when the laughter stops. When the child holding the bag of beans looks at the door and waits. Because somewhere in the part of the brain that is older than language, older than reason, the question is still there. What if something answers? The Oni endure because they answer a question no religion has fully answered. Not what happens to evil people after they die, but what happens to people who are broken by the world and never healed. The Christian tradition says they find grace, or they do not. The scientific tradition says there is nothing after no continuation, no consequence, no witness to what was done to them. The Japanese tradition says something different. It says they come back, not for revenge, Exactly. Not for justice, but because the pain did not stop when the body did. Because something that intense does not simply end, it transforms. It finds a new shape. It walks out of the mountain and stands at your door on a cold night. And it does not need you to believe in it. It just needs you to have forgotten that it was once human. Remember that the next time you lock your door. Remember that the next time you wrong someone and assume they will simply get over it. The Oni are not a warning about evil. They are a warning about what we do to each other and what the world does when no one is watching to the ones who have no one left to protect them. If this is the kind of story that stays with you, subscribe, because next time we go deeper. The fox with 9 tails, the dragon at the bottom of the sea, the woman with the split smile who asks you a question you cannot answer safely. Japan's darkness is older than its temples, and we have only just started.